of extraordinary leaders, we're going to go all the way back to where I was last week in Dubai. He is a mentor to many, a YPO forum facilitator, a business physicist, creator of CEO Freedom Operating System, the incredible Rajesh Nagjee. Welcome to Office Hours, the Human Experience.
Thank you for having me. Do I call you Bucky and David?
Yes.
Thank you for being here. Well, you know, it's interesting because I've seen so many different operating systems and all the different components in the interconnectivity, synergy, and supplemental value and capabilities that exist within those operating systems. But I've never seen Freedom operating system. So I was wondering what that framework is made up with when you have created, as this business physicist, this operating system, the Freedom operating system.
So every single founder, when he moves from being a scale-up, starting from a startup to a scale-up, sooner or later starts to find that he's lost his freedom in the inner game. And that is because of all the costs that he's got to meet, the targets, and so on and so forth. And then he's got a bunch of people that he's gathered together as a leadership team, and things aren't working the way he wants them to work. So that freedom is in the inner game, which would then allow him to focus on being a strategic visionary as opposed to being stuck in the weeds.
Yeah, it's great. I love the terminology of velocity crisis. I think one of the things that I talk about with leaders of that sort is I talk about energetic capacity, not only from an inner game perspective, but from a physiological perspective. How do I hold more energy so that I can create more in the world? I know that there's some frameworks that you have in this, the delegation and the client magnet. Can you walk through some of the framework and how it leads to alleviating velocity crisis?
So, the delegation framework is very, very powerful because I worked a lot in trying to figure out what is delegation. Turns out to be that all delegation is not made the same. So to start out with, when, people hire the leadership team, they end up delegating projects, tasks, and then they create scope. So when you have that combination of delegating projects, tasks, and scope, you converted your people into vendors. What you really want is partners, and you can only get partners if you learn how to delegate ownership and outcomes. So the whole framework is built on the outcome-driven innovation philosophy. What is the job that you're trying to do? What are the outcomes that are very important, not at all satisfied, and what is pivotal there? And that alignment at the outcome level, which ultimately comes down to only two dynamics: minimize risk and minimize time. That's when you start seeing a different level of delegation, and that produces immense velocity and freedom.
And within the context of that crisis, there's obvious bottlenecks that exist. I assume in the Freedom operating system, with the command center, delegation, client magnet, and personal branding as subsets to that operating system, that it's there to alleviate bottlenecks. What are some of the bottlenecks that these operating systems under the umbrella of the Freedom operating system dissipate, dissolve, and help alleviate?
So, when I started working with the theory of constraints and bottlenecks, I was in La La Land, thinking that there are as many bottlenecks as there are founders and people and businesses and types of businesses. Then when I started working with this as an experiment, I tried to find, is there one common bottleneck, one size fits all bottleneck? So the metaphor for that is, if there is an island and there is a mainland and there's a bridge across, that bridge is one permanent bottleneck for all the residents that are living on the island. So if they need to get to the mainland on time, they all figured out that if I leave at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, I will miss the morning rush. So I started thinking about, is there a one size fits all timeless bottleneck? Turns out there is, and that is that the conflict of being caught between focusing on short-term problems and issues versus long-term problems and issues. And that conflict that we are forced to focus on our here and now and the short-term requirements, and we are also forced to focus on the long-term requirements of growth, that conflict creates that turbulence, and with the result that people get stuck spending most of their time in the short term and leaving out all the long-term things into just plans and wishful thinking.
I'm really enjoying this conversation and the expanded thinking. And I know that your conversation with business owners goes beyond just the operations. I think the question that I want to ask you is, how much of this pushes into the realm of the invisible or what's beyond, kind of the day-to-day human experience, and maybe into a greater context around, why we're here, why we're doing that, these types of things. How much of this conversation pushes into that?
Well, I have been exposed to so many different bodies of work. I'm a trained musician, so I've worked with my guru for 35 years and been exposed to the spiritual aspect of music, of life, and so on. So when I looked at all of those things, I found that in the modern context, those things are pretty far away from the here and now. But I found something quite interesting, and I stumbled on it actually, is that the founders and the leadership teams have, there's fear, doubt, anxiety, which governs the inner game. And that really comes from incompletions and baggage of the past. And where it all really ties up with all the people that I've worked with is in their relationship with their parents. So I have helped over 40,000 people complete their relationship with their parents. They become free. And because of that, they are now available to communicate with each other, bond with each other, and create a different kind of dynamic that just sort of increases the velocity of growth in the outer game. So my job is to match the velocity of the desired velocity of the outer game with the velocity in the inner game. And when that matches, things just start to move effortlessly.
Perfect guess for the human experience. You're speaking Bucky in my language, and I've always said that if things ever get challenging, all I have to do is start a practice about mommy issues or daddy issues, and I'll have more than enough people to work with around the world. So that's a great place to start for sure. Bucky and I, of course, also have had our challenges in that space and had to do the inner work so that we can do the outer work as well. He's a mentor to many around the world, Middle East, Africa, Europe, India, and consistently observes what people are listening for. They're listening for an operating system, a framework, a practical framework with interconnected systems. That's what our friend, the business physicist and creator of CEO Freedom OS, Rajesh Nagjee, please promise us you'll come back and visit us soon. And hopefully we can get together in person when I come back to Dubai for the entrepreneurial program that I'm going to be instituting. Such a pleasure having you on. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day. Have a good evening, I should say. Thank you. All right.